So again, I think Clemson, it has the General Master of Architecture program, and it also has the like the healthcare studio, right? And those two studios sit separately within the building. The building was designed by Thomas Pfeiffer, so it's a really beautiful modern addition to kind of their older architecture building on campus, and really collaborative space in that building. I know, again, we sat in a different section, so we kind of have our own. It operated more like a firm. Everyone had their own kind of desk and computer, and it was a very kind of different experience than maybe what people would have experienced in Lee Hall, although still in the very much the spirit of the collaboration and kind of open floor plate, and everyone knows what everyone's doing, and it's very, very fluid. I would say that one of the things I wish that happened more and during my time at Clemson was more of an integration between the general program and the healthcare program. I mean, it happened, of course, in like the overlapping coursework and classes that we had to prepare, but I think there was a divide, and naturally, because we would be working on specific projects for our program and they would be working on specific projects for theirs, but just more of that cross collaboration, you know. And when it did happen, it was wonderful, right? Like different design build opportunities in their the General Master of Architectures, like they have a concentration in community build. You know, like integrating some of those with health and healthcare would have been cool. And I think that's something that would be neat to see in the future. I would have loved to have been able to take more electives. Like our program was so rigorous. We had, you know, very set classes each time. I think we had room for 2 electives throughout my 2 years there. To be able to branch out and take some of those coursework or kind of cross courses. But I do think that it's more maybe in the studio rather than in the elective courses that could happen. Excuse me, whether that's have, you know, a joint effort in terms of like having different studios come together on a joint project, or whether that's a vertical studio where you have second years working with first years on a similar project, and then you can branch out in different aspects and tailor it to the specific academic point and learning objectives that they're at right there. There needs to be more of that. I mean, the other thing that I would say that I was shocked at when I left Clemson was we worked on projects with groups and with teams pretty much my entire career at Clemson, right? I think I maybe worked on one individual project like once for a semester, like one semester. And I think that's so important because some of my colleagues that I work with today have come from other programs where all they did was individual work. And I mean, they even described studios where you put tents over your your desk so no one sees what you're doing. And that just to me is absurd because that's not architecture. It will never ever operate that way. It is never about you. It's always about a teamwork, and you know, projects don't operate in silos. And so I guess in that aspect, I was very happy I went to a program, but I know some students were very like, they wish that there was more one-on-one or like kind of solo projects so that they could distinguish themselves or so that they could try a different avenue. So I don't know what the balance of that is, but I do know that I came from a program whose pedagogy was very much all about collaboration. I think, you know, I mean, Clemson, it was a blessing and a curse that it was in the middle of like nowhere in South Carolina. So I had never been to South Carolina prior to going to Clemson. I mean, I guess maybe like Myrtle Beach when I was growing up, but that doesn't really count. So on the one hand, you know, that kind of isolation from other places, you know, I mean, Greenville's a wonderful city, but an hour away. You're 2 hours from Atlanta, you're 2 hours from Charlotte. So that rural life was coming when I was moving from DC there, or I guess in this case, Italy there too. That was a shock. It was definitely a shock. Small town living was a shock. I think there are 6 bars at Clemson, 2 of which are like okay for graduate students to go to. So I think that was good in the sense that the only thing to do was study and like be in studio. There was literally nowhere else to be. But then the bad thing was you kind of, you know, you don't maybe get the exposure that you would going to a school in the middle of a city like New York or Boston or DC or something. So that was the struggle. I mean, they set you up there to work, live, and breathe in studio. And I know that that's a big point of contention right now with not just Clemson, but a lot of schools are talking about that unhealthy expectation and balance of always being there. I mean, we always worked on group projects. So that's where you meet, you know, that's kind of what you have to do. And I guess I have a mixed feeling about that. You know, on the one hand, that environment over time could become toxic, but it's also like, I mean, a lot of the innovation happens at 3 a.m. when you're sitting there next to somebody, sketching or like working on a project. So it was, again, a blessing and a curse, but just the nature of it. I don't know that I agree that architecture school has to be that way or should be that way, but it is that way, I think, regardless of where you go. I feel like I got an excellent education in healthcare planning. And I feel like that I was able to push the boundaries of, to have a great healthcare facility or any facility that facilitates health, so to speak. You have to marry both the planning and design, right? I mean, whereas I think in other design studios, you would focus on the gem of something, right? It has to look a certain way, it has to be beautiful, but that's so disconnected from the reality of needing to function. So you have to kind of find the in between. And I think we were very heavily educated on how to make something work and how to make something very effective, and then design, and I think marrying those two is always a struggle, even in practice. But I do wish that maybe we had one studio that was a little bit more like focused on design only, right? Which I know a lot of other, that might go back to my point of that cross collaboration, right? Because whereas the general students, they were very focused on form and on composition and materiality and articulation and such. Not that, I mean, we definitely touched that, but it was in a very different capacity, right? So I really wish maybe we had focused on those aspects a little bit more for at least a studio or so, and then be able to kind of strengthen the design of some of our more functional like needs of the project. But again, that's very specific to healthcare. So that would just be my one wish, that we could have maybe spent a little more time in design. But that being said, it's always going to be that. I mean, it's even in practice, that's the balance, right? I mean, you work with designers who have never done healthcare, but they are very, very excellent at facade articulation, and they move something, and you have to work back and forth because they need to know what's informing it behind what's informing it, behind the wall and in front of the wall, and why something can work and why something can't. And yes, it could be about a form, but it also has to function. So it's a constant battle. So, but I do wish we had a little more of a development in design. They operate on kind of an every other year too. So because I'm a class of 8, the class above me was 8 people or 7 people, 7 to 8. But our office, or our studio, operated like an office of all of us together, right? So for our first semester, in order to kind of integrate, it was all 15 or 16 of us working on a vertical studio project, which, kind of looks at the more macro site aspects of health. So we did a lot of like kind of larger landscape design and building placement and understanding more of the sustainability aspects of that and narrowing it down. And then each person would take a parcel within this larger context, right? So we would do all the group work, and maybe you'd have the entire studio working on kind of all the site models and analysis and so forth. And then the next phase of it would be 2 or 3 of you kind of develop a specific section underneath those, and then each of you take a specific piece to develop further. And those pieces, we've done doctors' housing, we've done low-income housing. Yes, the housing can be part of that, but it's within a larger systemic context of like kind of a healthcare campus or a health environment. So the first semester was very general and kind of big like that, but I loved it because you worked at all different scales. And you came out with a project that was still like something that you did within it, but also something you learned from a teamwork together. And it was a great way to get to know your peers above you, and kind of learn the process and so forth. And then our second semester, we split off into 2. So my class of 8 and then the class above me, they all worked on their comprehensive project or their thesis, right, in their second year. And we worked on an individual or smaller group project. And those ran, we did a small federally qualified healthcare clinic on campus. And then we also won a grant through NCARB to look at that further. And we did a whole research development with them. Some of the second year projects in that time were, Anjali Joseph, she was the PhD student or PhD chair and professor. She's fabulous, and she won a big grant for the OR project. So part of them also worked on this design build of this operating room at MUSC in Charleston, which was really cool. And that was a 4-year research grant, so we did parts of that as well. And then of course I did the competition, so I feel like I had the time with a colleague of mine to do a rapid response, a vehicle for curbing communicable disease outbreaks. I'm trying to think of some of the other project types we did. I mean, we've done the whole hospital. One of our semesters is very dedicated to a hospital, a tertiary hospital facility, which is important. And then the other one can be kind of like, I elected to do a thesis, so a personal project that I wanted to work on. And so, I mean, in our other classes, we were able to be more exposed to a residential project, like, for example, our professional practice class, or some of our professional documentation classes of like learning, CDs and how the progression of that goes. We would do smaller projects like that. But yeah, I guess to say this is, sorry, a long-winded answer, but there were aspects about those things integrated within parts of our projects, but like I didn't have to necessarily design a residential facility as part of a project. Like only, right? It would be that within a bigger build. So, I mean, I guess you could say that that would have been nice too, maybe to do a different typology of project. But I figure too, if you're going to that specific program for healthcare, like, that's what you want to do. That's, you get a lot of different angles to that. That was really helpful.
What was your thesis about?
So, as I mentioned before, it kind of started back in 2015 after winning that the competition with my classmate, and so we kind of looked at those structures, and it was a rapid deployable model, using shipping containers and converting those into kind of these villages that were around Sierra Leone that could kind of prototype and rapidly assess different specific needs for Ebola camps. But then, like, what happens to that after, because so many of these, as we're seeing even right now, so many of these facilities that we're converting or that we're kind of building in these cases, like, they have a life after. And I guess I wanted to marry that with some of the other work that I was kind of looking at in terms of prototyping and the concept of more of a sustainable approach, looking at policy more in terms of how healthcare infrastructure and healthcare infrastructure policy can inform standards or inform and elevate health in general. So I kind of took those two ideas and again was looking at more storefront. I think it's like storefront primary care facilities that then turned into more storefront settings within developing context. And like I said, I looked at doing kind of a health and healing village in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. It was a primary care facility at first that kind of evolved into more of a district health center. But yeah, it was kind of using also the more informal aspects of your life and how health can integrate into that, right? Into more accessible settings for people rather than tertiary facilities, which is a trend we're seeing even here in the US, right? We're seeing a lot of those pop-up clinics and branding and kind of the whole total health and trying to be more accessible even on your phone now. So yeah, so my thesis was looking at those prototypes and template design and kind of adapting those to different conditions. And then, yeah, that was what got me into Global Health Corps. And, we took that. I mean, Mass had done a lot of work in that realm already. They worked with the Ministry of Health in Rwanda and also Liberia to develop their infrastructure standards, which were very similar prototypical examples, just at a bit of a larger scale. So is where I was looking in Ethiopia at healthcare clinics that were kind of a smaller, like community health clinic scale. They were looking more at a district hospital scale. But it was cool because that's still a very fluid document, and we were able to inform it through the design and kind of the realization of two of the prototype hospitals. And I worked mainly on the urban one, which is my thesis was in the urban realm, right? So that was like perfect. I mean, I really got like my dream job. Like, it was really a really neat opportunity to work with them and to contribute. So yeah, and that project just got built. So I think it just opened this past month or 2 months ago, which is really exciting. We'll see. Yeah, I would love if someone did like a post-occupancy evaluation on it, just to see, if everything we designed to was able to be realized, or if there were opportunities missed, or what the lessons learned could be. Yeah, that would be the next step.